The 911 call came in at 4:47 on a Wednesday afternoon in October. The dispatcher's name was Carol, and Carol had been taking emergency calls for 19 years. She had heard everything. She had heard the full spectrum of human crisis compressed into telephone wire, accidents and fires and violence, and the particular broken quality of voices that have just witnessed something they cannot undo. She had a system for staying steady. She had a protocol. She had 19 years of practice at being the calm in someone else's storm. But the voice on this call was different. It was small. It was a child's voice. And it was doing the particular thing that child voices do in genuine crisis, not performing distress, not seeking attention, but simply reporting from inside something too large for the body containing it, the way a transmitter reports from the middle of a disaster zone, just sending the signal, just keeping the line open. "My mom isn't waking up," the girl said. Carol straightened in her chair. She had a system. She followed it. "Okay, sweetheart," she said. "I'm going to help you. What's your name?" "Rosalie," the girl said. "Rosalie and Drummond. I'm 11. "Okay, Rosalie. You're doing great. Where are you right now?" "At home. At our house." A pause. The sound of breathing, careful and deliberate, the breathing of someone who had decided to hold themselves together. "She was sitting in the chair, and I came home from school, and she wouldn't. I shook her, and she won't." The voice fractured on the last word, just for a second, then pulled itself back. "She's breathing. I can see her breathing. But she won't wake up." "Okay," Carol said. "That's very important, that she's breathing. You did right to check that. I'm sending help right now, okay? I need you to stay on the phone with me." "Okay," Rosalie said. "Can you tell me your address?" She gave it. Clearly, completely. Her address, the cross street, the color of the house, so they could find it fast. She gave it the way someone who had prepared for emergencies gives information, organized and precise, and Carol filed that away. "Is there anyone else in the house with you?" "No," Rosalie said. "It's just us. My mom and me." "Okay. Is your mom's chest moving up and down?" "You said she's breathing." "Yes." "Up and down. But her color, her face it looks wrong." "Okay, I'm going to have you do something for me. Can you tell me everything you see? Every detail. It helps the paramedics." And the girl, this 11-year-old girl named Rosalie and Drummond, proceeded to describe the scene with a precision that Carol would later, in the break room, describe to her colleague as one of the most extraordinary things she'd heard in 19 years. Every detail. The position of the chair. Her mother's hands. The prescription bottle on the side table, which she read from aloud. OxyContin, prescribed to Patricia Drummond. The glass of water, knocked over on the floor, the spreading wet of it on the carpet. The television, on some afternoon talk show with the sound down low. The smell she didn't recognize, and which Carol knew the minute she heard the description. "You're doing so well," Carol said. "You're being so brave." "I'm not being brave," Rosalie said. Her voice was strange. Not cold, but very, very steady. "I just need her to be okay. That's all." The ambulance arrived in 7 minutes. Patricia and Drummond was 34 years old. She'd been a nurse for 8 of those years, which was one of the painful ironies of her situation, that she, who knew better, who had administered Narcan to patients in exactly this condition, who had talked to families in exactly the position her daughter was now in, had still arrived here. At this chair. With the bottle. People who knew Patricia from before the accident would say she'd been different. Bright-eyed. Fast-talking. The kind of nurse other nurses wanted on their shift because she thought 3 steps ahead and didn't panic and remembered the details that mattered. She'd been funny, too, dry and quick, the kind of humor that required you to be paying attention. The accident had been 14 months ago. Not her accident. She hadn't been driving. A patient had been released, a patient in her ward, a man who should not have been given the keys to his car that afternoon, and Patricia had been in the parking structure at the end of her shift when he'd driven through the barrier of the top floor. She'd survived because she was far enough from the car that the main impact missed her. The secondary impact, the falling concrete, the car coming to rest against the pillar she'd been walking past, had not missed her entirely. Spinal damage. Manageable, the doctors said, which meant real, permanent, but not catastrophic. She walked with a limp that was worse on cold days. She had a pain that lived in the base of her back and radiated down her left leg and was not always controllable by the medications that were supposed to control it. She'd been on the pain medications for 14 months. She'd been trying to get off them for 6. Rosalie and Drummond had ridden in the ambulance. They'd tried to make her wait for a neighbor or a social worker or someone adult adjacent, but Rosalie had done the thing she sometimes did when adults made suggestions that conflicted with what she decided. She had looked at the paramedic with a level, unblinking gaze and said, "She is my mother and I am going with her. Please tell me what I can do to help." The paramedic, his name was Franklin, he had 2 kids of his own, had looked at her for 3 seconds and then made room in the ambulance. She sat beside the stretcher the whole way, watching the paramedics work, asking brief and specific questions at appropriate intervals, absorbing the answers. At the hospital, they put her in a waiting room. This was where everything stopped being something she could actively manage. In the ambulance there had been things to watch, information to absorb. Here there was a chair and beige walls and a television playing the same afternoon talk show that had been playing in her living room when she'd found her mother, which felt like a message from the universe about its sense of humor. She sat in the chair. She put her backpack on the floor between her feet. She folded her hands on her knees. She was 11 years old, and she was alone in a hospital waiting room, and her mother was somewhere behind a door she wasn't allowed through. She did not cry. Not yet. She held everything very carefully, the way you hold something that might break, the way you carry water in cupped hands, knowing you can't carry it forever, but trying to get somewhere before you have to let go. She thought about who to call. This was its own complicated problem. Her father was not in the picture, had not been in the picture since Rosalie was 4, in a way that had started with absence and completed with a legal document. Her grandmother on her mother's side had died 2 years ago, the loss that had started the fragile chain of events leading here. Her grandmother on her father's side she had never met. There was an aunt, her mother's younger sister, named Beverly, who lived in Phoenix and with whom her mother had a complicated relationship that Rosalie had absorbed through years of half-conversations and careful subject changes. She found Beverly's number in her phone. Her mother had put it there, had said in case of emergency in a way that was both practical and ominous. She stared at it. Then she thought about another number. A number she'd had for 3 months, given to her by her mother's sponsor in the 12-step program Patricia had joined in July, the program she'd been trying and struggling and trying again with. The sponsor's name was Grace, and Grace had given Rosalie the number and said, "If your mom is in trouble and you need an adult, you call me." She called Grace. Grace answered on the first ring. Grace Oduya was 51 years old. She had been sober for 17 years. Before that she had been, in her own precise description, a person who treated the concept of a bottom floor as a challenge to find lower. She was small, 5'1", and had a way of moving through the world that made her seem larger, the presence of someone who had become very clear about who she was and what she was for. She'd met Patricia at a meeting in July. She'd recognized something immediately. Not the addiction, she saw that everywhere, but the particular quality of someone who was smart enough to understand exactly what was happening to them and powerless to stop it with intelligence alone. The intelligence, in fact, was part of the problem. Patricia could explain her situation with clinical precision. She just couldn't fix it from the inside. Grace had become her sponsor because Patricia had asked her to, and because Grace trusted her own recognition of the particular kind of person she could help. She'd given Rosalie her number because she'd met Rosalie once, at a coffee shop where Patricia had brought her daughter for reasons that were probably about wanting Rosalie to see she was trying, and Grace had watched this 11-year-old across the table and seen something that made her chest ache. Rosalie was managing. In the specific, too competent way of children who have filled the gap their parent can't fill. She was managing the household and her mother's schedule and the weight of worry with a quiet efficiency that no 11-year-old should be equipped with. Grace had looked at her across that coffee table and thought, this child needs someone to tell her she doesn't have to manage this alone. When her phone rang and she saw the number and heard Rosalie's voice, steady, precise, reporting, she was in her car within 3 minutes. She arrived at the hospital 25 minutes after the call. She found Rosalie in the waiting room, sitting in the chair with her backpack between her feet and her hands folded on her knees, looking at the wall opposite with an expression of absolute determined steadiness. Grace sat beside her. "Hey, baby," she said. "Hi, Grace," Rosalie said. "You did everything right," Grace said. "They won't tell me anything," Rosalie said, "because I'm a minor. I explained that there's no one else, but they said they need a legal guardian or an adult." "I'll talk to them," Grace said. "Can you get information? You're not family. I'm going to tell them you're with me and that we need someone to speak with us." Grace put her hand briefly on Rosalie's folded hands. "Let me handle the adult part." Rosalie looked at her. "She was breathing," she said. "When I found her, she was breathing. I checked." "I know," Grace said. "You told them that. You told them everything they needed." "I could see the bottle," Rosalie said. "OxyContin." She'd been trying to get off them. She'd been having a really hard week. "I should have—" She stopped. Started again. "I should have called to check on her before I walked home." "No," Grace said, firmly, without room for argument. "You should have been at school, which is where you were. This is not yours to have prevented." Rosalie looked at the wall. "I read an article once," she said, "about children of parents with addiction. It said the children often develop, it called it hypervigilance, that they're always watching for signs, preparing for emergencies." She paused. "I didn't think I was doing that, but I knew all the right things to tell the dispatcher. I knew what to look for. I knew the bottle was important." Grace didn't say anything. "I've been preparing for this," Rosalie said. Not with bitterness. Just the factual qualities she had. Without knowing I was. "You saved her life," Grace said quietly. The words landed. Rosalie's folded hands tightened against each other. 1 degree. Just 1 degree of the composure shifting. "She has to be okay," Rosalie said. "I know," Grace said. "She's been trying," Rosalie said. "I need you to know that. She's been trying so hard. The meetings, every week. The sponsor. You, that's you. The doctor appointments. She's been trying. I know she has, Grace said. I've been with her every step of it. A doctor appeared in the waiting room doorway. Her mother was stable. That was the word they used first, and it was the word Rosalie grabbed onto with both hands. Stable meant not gone. Stable meant there was still time. The doctor, a man in his 40s with a tired face and kind eyes, explained that they'd administered Narcan. That her mother was going to need to be monitored. That this was a serious incident, and there would be conversations about next steps. Next steps, Rosalie said. What does that mean? The doctor looked at her with a slight recalibration of someone who is not quite prepared for a child to ask adult questions. Grace put a hand on Rosalie's arm. What it means is that your mom is going to get help, she said. Real help. The kind that addresses the actual problem. The kind she's been trying to get to on her own, Rosalie said. Yes. She needs it to be inpatient, Rosalie said. She'd read about this too. She'd read about everything she could find, the way children in her particular situation did, arming themselves with information as if knowledge were armor. Outpatient isn't working. The pain management and the dependency are, they're tangled. She needs someone to untangle them. The doctor looked at her. Then at Grace. She's right, Grace said simply. I'm aware of the right approach, the doctor said, to Rosalie, respecting the question. We'll be having those conversations with your mother when she's able to have them. Good, Rosalie said. I'll be there for those conversations. Another recalibration on the doctor's face. We'll need to sort out custody arrangements while. I'll be staying with Grace, Rosalie said. She looked at Grace. A question in it, but only barely. She'll be staying with me, Grace confirmed, in a tone that closed the administrative question. The doctor nodded. Told them visiting hours. Left. Rosalie sat back down. Grace sat beside her. Your hands are shaking, Grace said. Rosalie looked at her hands. They were, in fact, shaking, a fine vibration, the kind that happens when the body has been running on adrenaline and the adrenaline has found an edge. Oh, Rosalie said. I didn't notice. Let yourself feel it, Grace said. If I feel it now. It won't break you, Grace said. I promise you. You're allowed to feel it now. She's stable. You can let some of it out. Rosalie looked at her hands. Something in her face changed. The steadiness that had been there since the phone call, the extraordinary adult steadiness, shifted. Beneath it was the 11-year-old. Beneath it was the child who had come home from school and walked into her living room and found her mother in a chair that wouldn't give her back. I was so scared, Rosalie said. Her voice was different now. Smaller. Truer. I know, Grace said. I kept talking to the dispatcher because I was scared that if I stopped talking something would happen. You did exactly right. When they told me she was breathing but wouldn't wake up, the voice fractured again, the same place it had fractured on the phone, on the word wake. When they put her on the stretcher and her face looked. She's here, Grace said. She's stable. She's going to get help. Rosalie pressed her hands flat on her knees. Looked at the ceiling. And for the first time since 4:47 that afternoon, she cried. Not quietly. Not the contained, managed version. She cried the way you cry when you've been holding everything together for a very long time and something finally holds it for you. Completely, without apology, without management, the grief and fear of a child who loves her mother and has been watching her mother disappear by degrees and came home on a Wednesday afternoon and found what she found. Grace held her. They sat in the waiting room of a hospital in October, and Grace held this child who had done everything right and was still terrified and was still, underneath all the competence, a girl who just needed her mother to be okay. Grace took Rosalie home that night. Her apartment was the second floor of a house on Clement Street, warm, organized, with books on every surface and a kitchen that smelled like something had been cooked in it recently. She made Rosalie eat soup, real soup from a pot, with bread. Rosalie ate because Grace asked her to, and because she recognized that her body had been running on nothing since lunch. They sat at the kitchen table afterward. "Tell me about school," Grace said. Rosalie looked at her. "You're doing the thing where you redirect toward normal things." "I am," Grace confirmed. "Is it working?" "Slightly," Rosalie said. "Good enough. Tell me about school." Rosalie told her about school. She was in 6th grade, the first year of middle school, which she found more interesting than she'd expected. She liked science, and she liked history, and she found her English teacher slightly ineffective, but was working around it. She had 2 close friends, a girl named Margot who was quiet and funny and loved marine biology, and a boy named Sam who argued about everything but was almost always willing to admit when he was wrong, which Rosalie had decided was the only kind of arguing that was actually worth engaging with. "They don't know," Rosalie said, meaning Margot and Sam, "about her mother." "What do they know?" "That my mom has some health problems. That things have been hard since the accident. They've been kind about it. They don't push." She paused. "I've been careful not to tell them too much because I don't want them to look at me differently." "How would they look at you differently?" Rosalie considered this. "With that particular look," she said. "The sad one. Where people see the situation instead of you." Grace nodded. "I know that look." "You had it once," Rosalie said. At Grace's expression, "The first time I met you. At the coffee shop. Just for a second. Then it went away. What replaced it?" "Something else," Rosalie said. She seemed to consider the description. "Something more like recognition. Like you'd seen something and were deciding what to do with it." "You are very perceptive," Grace said. "I've had a lot of practice watching people," Rosalie said. The flatness in it was not bitterness, just accuracy. Grace looked at her across the kitchen table. At this 11-year-old who had organized herself around her mother's illness the way a building organizes itself around its structural requirements, everything fitted to the purpose of keeping things standing. "Rosalie," she said. "Yes." "You know you're allowed to be a child, right?" Rosalie was quiet. "I know that sounds obvious," Grace said. "But I want to say it explicitly. You are allowed to not manage everything. You are allowed to need help. You are allowed to fall apart in a waiting room and eat soup that someone else made and sleep in a bed that isn't yours without that meaning you failed at anything." "I know that intellectually," Rosalie said. "What about non-intellectually?" A longer pause. "It's harder," she said finally. "The non-intellectual part." "Yeah," Grace said. "It usually is." She put Rosalie in the guest room with clean sheets and a glass of water and the lamp on the nightstand turned to its lowest setting, the kind of light that was between dark and lit. She sat on the edge of the bed for a moment the way adults sometimes sit with children, not doing anything, just being present in the specific proximity of it. "Grace," Rosalie said. "Yeah." "Does she know what she almost she stopped. Does she know what happened? She'll know when she wakes up, Grace said. And we'll be there. I want her to know that I found her, Rosalie said. I want her to know that she wasn't alone. That I was there. That I didn't leave her. She'll know, Grace said. I'll make sure she knows. Rosalie lay back on the pillow. She looked at the ceiling. I want her to get better, she said. Not for me. Well, for me, yes. But also for her. I want her to be the person she was before. I remember that person. She was a pause. She was someone who laughed a lot. She used to sing in the kitchen. She had this particular laugh when something really surprised her, this sudden loud laugh that she'd immediately try to cover with her hand because she was embarrassed about how loud it was. A small, careful smile. I haven't heard that laugh in 14 months. Grace felt something move through her chest. I know what that's like, she said quietly. Waiting for someone to come back. Did they? Rosalie asked. Come back. Grace looked at her. I came back, she said. From a very long way. It took time and help and a lot of days of choosing it over and over. But I came back. Is that what recovery is? Rosalie said. Choosing it every day. Something like that. That sounds exhausting. It is, Grace said honestly. And it gets easier. And then something makes it hard again. And then you get through that and it's easier again. She stood up. Your mom knows that. She's been choosing it. Today was a hard day in that process. But she's still choosing it. The fact that she was in treatment, that she had a sponsor, that she had you calling 911, that's all part of the choosing. Rosalie processed this. Okay, she said finally. Okay, Grace said. She turned off the overhead light and left the lamp on and left the door slightly open, the strip of hallway light falling across the floor. The next morning, Grace made calls. This was what Grace did. This was what she was, in some fundamental way, a person who knew who to call and how to make the call and what to say once someone picked up. She'd spent 17 years building a network of people who helped people, the informal and essential infrastructure of recovery communities, the connections that existed outside of systems and paperwork and waiting lists because they were made of human decisions rather than institutional ones. She called the treatment center, a real one, inpatient, the one she'd wanted to get Patricia into for months, but which had a waiting list and which Patricia's insurance covered only partially. She called a woman named Helen who sat on the board of the facility. She called 2 other people who called 2 other people. She had been at this work for a long time. She understood that the formal systems were necessary and insufficient simultaneously, that the gaps between systems were where people fell, and that the only way to fill those gaps was with human beings who were paying attention. While she made calls, Rosalie sat at the kitchen table and did homework. She'd asked Grace if she could, with the precision of someone who needed structure when the world was unstructured. Grace had said of course and given her the table and made her tea. Rosalie did her homework and listened to Grace make calls with half her attention, not eavesdropping exactly, but cataloging, the old habit. She heard names and details and the particular language of people navigating care systems, the language of we need to make this work said in different registers for different audiences. You've done this before, Rosalie said when Grace paused between calls. A lot of times, Grace said. For your other sponsees. For them. For other people. Whoever needs it. Rosalie looked at her tea. Do you ever get tired of it? Grace considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I get tired," she said. "But not of it. Not of the actual work. The work it's why I'm here. I mean that literally. The reason I got sober is that I reached the point where I understood that I had something to offer and I couldn't offer it while I was drinking. So the work is the reason." "That's a good reason," Rosalie said. "What's your reason for things?" Grace said, "For doing things so well, for managing so much." Rosalie looked at her homework. "My mom," she said simply. "Just her." A pause. "No," Rosalie said. She seemed surprised by her own honesty. "Also for me. Because I want to go somewhere. I want to be someone. I read about this scientist once, this woman who grew up really poor, really difficult circumstances, and she won the Nobel Prize, and she said the thing that kept her going was curiosity. That curiosity was bigger than circumstances. I liked that." "What are you curious about?" "Everything," Rosalie said. She said it without embarrassment, the way you can say things like that to people who won't find it pretentious. Chemistry especially. How things work at the molecular level. How something that looks one way on the surface is doing completely different things underneath. "That sounds like people," Grace said. Rosalie looked up. "Yeah," she said slowly. "I guess it does." Patricia Drummond woke up Thursday morning. Rosalie was in the chair beside her bed when she opened her eyes. She'd been there since visiting hours started at 9, sitting with a book she wasn't reading, watching her mother's face. Patricia's eyes opened slowly, found the ceiling, then, following some instinct, found Rosalie. She looked at her daughter. Rosalie looked back. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Patricia's face went through everything. The confusion of not quite knowing where she was, and then the knowing, and then the full weight of the knowing, what it meant, what had happened, what her 11-year-old daughter had seen. The face of a mother confronting the reality of what her child had witnessed. "Rosie," she said. Her voice was rough. "Hi, Mom," Rosalie said. Steady. You found me." It wasn't a question. She knew. "Yes." "You called." 911. "Yes." "You were breathing." "I checked." Patricia closed her eyes. A tear ran sideways across her temple, into her hair. "I'm so sorry," she said. "Mom." Rosalie put her hand on her mother's hand. "I know. I was trying. I've been trying. I know you have. I didn't mean. I know, Mom." Patricia turned her head to look at Rosalie directly. Her eyes were red-rimmed and exhausted and had something in them that was different. Cracked open in a way that exhaustion and crisis sometimes cracked people open, the way a seed coat cracked so something could grow. "You saved my life," Patricia said. Rosalie tightened her hand on her mother's. "You saved mine every day for 11 years, she said. "I just returned a favor." Patricia's breath caught. The tears came more steadily then. "I need real help," Patricia said. "I know that. I've known that." "Grace is working on it," Rosalie said. "She's been on the phone since yesterday. There's a place. It's called," she'd memorized the name, "the Harbor Institute. Inpatient, 90 days. Insurance covers 70%. Grace is working on the rest." Patricia looked at her. "How do you know all that?" "I listened," Rosalie said simply. Patricia pressed her lips together. You've been managing everything. Someone had to. That's not. Rosie, you shouldn't have had to. Mom. Rosalie looked at her mother directly. We are going to have this conversation. We are absolutely going to have it. But right now, I need you to know one thing. Patricia waited. I love you, Rosalie said. Everything I've done has been because I love you, and I know you love me, and I know you've been fighting something I can't fight for you. But I need you to go to this place. I need you to go and stay the whole time and do the work. Because I want my mom back. Not the managed version. Not the fighting everyday version. The one who sang in the kitchen. The one with the loud laugh she was embarrassed about. Patricia's face broke apart entirely. I remember that laugh, she whispered. I know you do, Rosalie said. I want to hear it again. Grace came in at 10 with coffee and the paperwork. The paperwork was real. There was a spot at the Harbor Institute, opening in 2 weeks, and the financial arrangement had been worked out through a combination of insurance, a scholarship fund Grace had connected with, and a third source she explained briefly as people who give because they know what it's worth. Patricia looked at the forms. 2 weeks, she said. You'll stay here for stabilization, Grace said. Then the 2 weeks gives us time to arrange things. For Rosalie. Where will she go? Patricia said. She looked at her daughter. While I'm with me, Grace said. If that's agreeable. For 3 months. Patricia said. For however long is needed, Grace said. I have the room. I have the schedule. Rosalie's school is 15 minutes from my apartment. Patricia looked at Rosalie. I already did the route on Google Maps, Rosalie said. It's manageable. Patricia almost laughed. Something flickered across her face, surprised, involuntary, quickly covered by her hand. The laugh Rosalie had been missing. Rosalie watched it happen. Said nothing. Filed it in the permanent place. Okay, Patricia said. She picked up the pen. Okay. Let's do this. Here is where the story takes a turn that nobody in the hospital room was expecting. Where the shape of the next 3 months became something different from what any of them had planned. Because Grace Oduya had made a lot of calls on Thursday morning. And one of them was to a man named Roland. Roland James Hicks was 62 years old. He was the president of the Northern California chapter of the Hells Angels, a position he'd held for 16 years, and before that he'd been the road captain, and before that he'd been the newest member looking at a group of men who had become his family in the only true sense of that word, the sense where family means the people who show up. He was large the way some men are large, not just in body but in presence, the kind of man a room responds to when he enters it, not because he requires it, but because it's the natural consequence of someone who has become very clear about their purpose. He'd known Grace Oduya for 11 years. They'd met at a fundraiser for a recovery center, and they'd recognized each other immediately. Not romantically, nothing like that, but in the way of people who are doing adjacent work and can see the shape of it in each other. She was a sponsor and a connector. He ran a program called Brothers on Watch, which was exactly what it sounded like. Members of his club who had made a commitment to showing up for families in need in their community. Not charity, they were very clear about that. Not charity. Presence. Brothers on Watch had started because Roland's sister had been in exactly Patricia Drummond's situation 12 years ago, and nobody had shown up for her 2 children when she went to treatment, and those children had bounced through the foster system and been separated, and one of them had never quite recovered from the separating, and Roland had spent 12 years trying to make sure that didn't happen to other families. When Grace called him on Thursday morning and described Rosalie and Drummond, 11 years old, alone, her mother in the hospital, 2 weeks until a treatment bed opened, he'd listened with the full attention he brought to things that mattered. "What does she need?" he said. "Stability," Grace said. "The same thing every kid needs. Consistent people who show up consistently." Her world has been very inconsistent for 14 months. "What else?" "She's brilliant," Grace said. "She's carrying things no child should carry. She needs someone to take some of it from her. Not to fix it. Just to help her put it down for a while. She in school. 6th grade. Good student. 2 friends. Doesn't want people to see her situation instead of her." Roland wrote things on the notepad he always had. "Send me her address," he said. "The school, the routine. Whatever you have." "Roland," Grace said. "Yeah." "Don't overwhelm her," Grace said. "She's organized. She doesn't like things she can't understand or predict. If you're sending people, let me introduce them first." "Of course," Roland said. He hung up and went to find his vice president. The vice president of the Northern California chapter was a woman named Shirley Watson. This surprised people who expected a different demographic, and Shirley had a very specific facial expression for their surprise. Patient, slightly amused, completely unmoved. She'd been writing since she was 17. She'd been in the club for 20 years. She'd outlasted people's assumptions about her the way rivers outlast rocks, not by force, just by persistence. She was 53 and had done everything Roland was going to ask her to do a dozen times before. He explained the situation. She listened. "How old is the kid?" she said. 11. "Smart." Grace says exceptional. "Okay." Shirley picked up her phone. Started making her own calls. "I'll do the introduction. Send 2 other people with me so she can see there's a community, not just one person." "Who do we send?" "Donna," Roland said immediately. Donna Chen, no relation to anyone in the previous stories, ran the chapter's community outreach and had 3 kids of her own and the particular maternal energy that wasn't smothering but was present. And Bobby. Bobby Preston was 65 and had been in the club for 30 years and looked exactly like someone's grandfather, which he was, for times over. His grandchildren called him Pop. He brought cookies to meetings. He was also the most efficient logistics organizer Roland had ever seen. "Bobby will have a schedule built before the first visit ends," Shirley said. "That's why I want him there," Roland said. Grace brought Rosalie home from the hospital on Saturday. Patricia was stable, improving, beginning the long conversation with the treatment team that was the first part of the work. Rosalie had spent 2 more mornings in the chair beside her mother's bed, doing homework on her phone and talking about ordinary things. The television shows they both liked, what they'd make for dinner when her mother came home, a book Rosalie had started and which Patricia had promised to read when she got out so they could discuss it. These conversations about ordinary things were not avoidance. They were practice. They were both of them building the muscles of normal, the way you build any muscle, by using it, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. On Saturday afternoon, Grace sat Rosalie at the kitchen table and said, "I want to tell you about some people who are going to be around." Rosalie looked at her. "Who?" "They're from a motorcycle club," Grace said. "The Hells Angels." Rosalie was quiet. "I know that sounds," Grace started. "I know what the Hells Angels are," Rosalie said. "Not from stereotype. I read about their community work. There are documented programs they run in multiple states, toy drives, support for military families, programs for abused children. She paused. I didn't know they did work like this. Not all chapters, Grace said. But this one, the president, his name is Roland, he runs something called Brothers on Watch. It's people from the club who commit to showing up for families who need support while a parent is in treatment. Consistent support. The same people, on a schedule, doing specific things that help. Rosalie processed this. What would they do? She said. A few things, Grace said. Transportation to the hospital to see your mother. Someone here in the evenings so you're not alone. Help with anything practical that comes up. I don't need babysitters, Rosalie said. The chin came up. Not rudely, just with the precision of someone being clear about themselves. They're not coming to babysit you, Grace said. They're coming because your mother is fighting for her life in a hospital and you're 11 and you should not be alone while that happens. Not because you can't manage alone. You've proven you can manage, but because nobody should have to. Rosalie looked at the table. There's a difference, Grace continued, between being able to manage and having to manage. You are able to. You shouldn't have to. That's all. Rosalie was quiet for a moment. Okay, she said. When do I meet them? Tomorrow, if that's all right. Can I know who they are first? So I'm not. I don't like not knowing things in advance. Of course, Grace said. She slid a piece of paper across the table. 3 names. 3 brief descriptions. Roland's name at the top, then Shirley, then a name below that, Donna, 3 kids, runs community outreach. Rosalie read it. Looked at the other side for more information. Found there wasn't any. Can I look them up? She said. You can try, Grace said. They're not hard to find. Rosalie spent 45 minutes on her laptop that evening. She found Roland's name in a news article about a toy drive. She found Shirley mentioned in a profile of women in motorcycle culture. She found a brief mention of Brothers on Watch in a local community newsletter from 2 years prior. Then she sat and thought. She thought about her mother and the Harbor Institute and 90 days and the laugh being covered by a hand. She thought about what Grace had said, nobody should have to manage alone, and the way it had landed somewhere underneath the part of her that always said I'm fine, I can handle it. She thought about what it would mean. To let people in. To let the weight be distributed differently. She'd been carrying it alone for so long that she was afraid, in some specific way, that putting it down would mean it wasn't hers anymore. That her mother wasn't hers anymore. That needing help was a form of relinquishing. But that wasn't what Grace was describing. Grace was describing people who showed up. Who sat in chairs and drove cars and were present not because they were taking something but because they were offering something. She thought about the 911 call. About the dispatcher Carol saying you're doing so well. About the paramedic Franklin making room in the ambulance. About Grace arriving at the hospital 25 minutes after a phone call. People showing up. She closed her laptop. Okay, she said to the empty guest room. Okay. They came on Sunday. 3 motorcycles in Grace's street. She watched from the window as they pulled up, the sound of them carrying through the glass. Shirley, Donna, and a man who must have been Bobby, older, gray-haired, with a face that looked like it had been used a lot and pleasantly so. Grace brought them up. Rosalie stood in the kitchen doorway. Shirley was shorter than Rosalie had expected. She had a directness to her look that Rosalie responded to immediately, None of the careful tiptoeing around the situation, none of the performed sensitivity. Just looking at her like a person. "You must be Rosalie," Shirley said. "Yes," Rosalie said. "I'm Shirley. This is Donna and Bobby. We're not here to fix anything. We're here to be useful if you'll have us." Rosalie assessed this for a moment. "What specifically did you have in mind?" Bobby, behind Shirley, made a sound that was clearly a suppressed smile. "Transportation to the hospital," Shirley said. 3 times a week at minimum, more if you need it. Someone here in the evenings when Grace has other commitments. Practical help, groceries, whatever. And whatever else comes up. "That's comprehensive," Rosalie said. "We try to be thorough," Bobby said. Rosalie looked at him. Something in his face, the patience of it, the warmth that wasn't performing warmth but was just there, made her relax by a fraction. "Do you want tea?" she said. "Grace makes tea." Bobby looked at Shirley. "I'd love tea," he said. Bobby Preston became, over the next week, a consistent and quietly indispensable presence. He was not what Rosalie had expected. She'd expected, she realized, something more dramatic, the leather jacket energy of the kind of stories she'd read about motorcycle clubs, the larger-than-life quality. Bobby was large in the comfortable way of someone who had arrived completely at who they were and no longer needed to announce it. He came on Monday evenings with a game, board games, card games, simple things, and sat at Grace's kitchen table with Rosalie, and they played and talked about whatever came up. He had an opinion about everything, and delivered his opinions with the particular relish of someone who enjoyed the act of arguing without needing to win. "Chemistry is the best science," he announced on the second Monday. He had no particular basis for this. He said it to see what would happen. What happened was that Rosalie looked up from the game and said, with the precision of someone correcting a factual error, "That's not a coherent claim." Best science by what metric? Application. Theoretical elegance. Historical impact. Bobby pointed at her. "There you are," he said. "I was wondering when you'd come out." Rosalie looked at him. "What do you mean?" "You've been watching me," he said. "Very carefully. Which I understand. I'm a stranger. But I could see you deciding whether it was safe to actually be yourself." Rosalie was quiet. "I'm not dangerous to you," Bobby said. "Not defensively. Just stating a fact. None of us are. We're here because Roland asked us to be here, and Roland is a good man who does good work, and we trust his judgment. We're also here because," he paused, "seemed to decide on honesty. I have 4 grandchildren. Oldest is Rosalie's age. And when Roland described this situation, I thought about my granddaughter. About what it would mean for her to be in a hospital waiting room at 11 years old and have no one." He picked up his game piece. "So I'm here." Rosalie looked at her game piece. "My mom has her first proper intake session tomorrow," she said. "With the treatment team at the hospital. They're doing a full assessment for the Harbor Institute placement." "How are you feeling about that?" "Complicated," she said. "Yeah," Bobby said. "That makes sense." "I want her to go," Rosalie said. "And I'm scared of her going." Both at the same time. "The going means 90 days without seeing her," Bobby said. "Weekly visits," Rosalie said. "They have weekly family visits. I read the program details." "You read the program details." "I wanted to know what to expect." Bobby looked at her with the same expression Grace had had at the coffee shop. Not pity, not performed sympathy, but recognition. The seeing of a specific thing. "You know what you are," he said. "Over-prepared." Rosalie said. "Resilient," he said. "And I mean that precisely. Not just tough. Resilient, the capacity to organize around difficulty, to keep functioning, to find information and make decisions and still be able to ask for tea and sit across from a stranger and eventually decide he's not going to hurt you." Rosalie looked at the game board. "I don't always feel resilient," she said. "Nobody does," Bobby said. "The feeling and the doing are different things." Shirley drove her to the hospital on Tuesday. They didn't talk much on the drive. Shirley seemed to understand, with the instinct she had for people, that Rosalie needed the drive to prepare herself, not to make conversation. She drove and let Rosalie look out the window and be in whatever she was in. "At the hospital," Shirley said. "I'll be in the lobby. Take whatever time you need." Rosalie nodded. Got out. Went inside. The intake session was different from the days before. Patricia looked more present. The stabilization medications had done their work, and beneath the exhaustion and the physical effects there was more of her mother's face in her face, the specific Patricianness of it. The treatment team was 3 people, a doctor, a therapist, and a social worker named James who would be Patricia's primary advocate through the process. They were professional and direct, and when Rosalie sat in a room, she'd asked to be there, she'd been allowed, she was going to be there. They treated her with the same directness, which she appreciated. The assessment confirmed the Harbor Institute placement. 2 weeks away. 90 days. Weekly family visits. The social worker would be in contact with Grace about Rosalie's arrangements. After the clinical people left, Patricia and Rosalie sat alone in the hospital room. Patricia looked at her daughter. "Tell me how you're doing," she said. "Really?" Rosalie thought about it. "I'm scared," she said. "And I'm relieved. And I'm angry, a little. Not at you, at the situation. At the accident that started everything. At the medication that was supposed to help and did something else instead." "That's a very healthy set of feelings," Patricia said. "Grace said I should let myself have them." "Grace is wise," Patricia said. She reached out. Rosalie took her hand. "I need to say something." "Okay." "I've been aware of what you've been doing," Patricia said. "For 14 months. The managing. The holding everything together. I've been aware, and I've let it continue because I didn't have—" Her voice caught. "Because I was using everything I had just to get through the days, and I let you pick up what I was dropping, and I'm going to spend a long time making that right." "Mom." "Let me finish," Patricia said. Gently but completely. "You are 11 years old, and you have been the most responsible person in your household for 14 months, and that is my failure and not a reflection of anything about you except your extraordinary capacity to love someone even when they're failing you." Rosalie was very still. "I see you," Patricia said. "I want you to know that. I see everything you've done. I see how much it has cost you. And I am going to go to this place and do the work and come back able to be your mother in the way you deserve." Rosalie looked at their joined hands. "I know you will," she said. "How do you know?" "Because you called Grace," Rosalie said. "Because you asked for a sponsor. Because you've been trying, even when you were failing, you were trying. People who don't want to get better don't try. They just fail. You were failing and trying at the same time. That's different." Patricia looked at her. "When did you become so wise?" "I read a lot," Rosalie said. Patricia laughed. The sudden surprised laugh, the one she covered with her hand, the one that had been missing for 14 months. Rosalie heard it. Her whole face opened. 2 weeks passed. They were full weeks. Not easy, not hard. Full, in the way that life can be full when it's being lived with intention. Rosalie went to school. She told Margot and Sam more than she'd told them before. Not everything, but more. She told them her mom was going to a treatment program. That things had been hard. That she was staying with a friend of her mother's named Grace. Margot cried. Rosalie had known she would and let it happen without managing it. Sam, who argued about everything, argued that the system that had made Patricia's pain management so difficult was structurally broken and should be fixed, and presented a surprisingly researched case for this, and Rosalie agreed with most of it and told him so, and Sam looked quietly delighted. Bobby came on Monday evenings. Donna came on Wednesday afternoons when Grace was at a meeting and sat with Rosalie and talked about her kids, 3 of them. She showed pictures, told stories, included Rosalie in the ordinary fabric of her family life without making a production of it, just let her exist in the warmth of it. Shirley drove her to the hospital 3 times a week. On the 2nd week, Patricia started sitting up in the hospital bed instead of lying down, started engaging more with the preparations, started talking about the Harbor Institute with something approaching anticipation rather than just resignation. She asked Shirley questions about the club, about Brothers on Watch, about how this network of people had materialized around her daughter in 2 weeks. Shirley answered directly, the way she answered everything. Told her about Roland and the program and the sister and the children who'd been separated. Told her that this was the work because the work was what mattered. Patricia listened. "Thank you," she said. "Your daughter made it easy," Shirley said. You should be proud of her." "I am," Patricia said. "I've been proud of her every single day. I just haven't been able to show it the way it deserved to be shown." "You'll have time," Shirley said. 90 days, Patricia said. "And then the rest of it," Shirley said. "One day at a time." But yes. The day Patricia left for the Harbor Institute was a Thursday in November, 3 weeks after the afternoon in the living room chair. Rosalie packed her mother's bag. Patricia had made a list, and Rosalie followed it methodically, folding clothes carefully, packing the books her mother wanted, the photograph she'd asked for, the 2 of them, a birthday 2 years ago, before the accident, both of them laughing at something off camera. She added one thing of her own, a letter. Short, handwritten, folded twice and tucked into the front pocket of the bag where her mother would find it. She didn't say what was in the letter except to say it was things she wanted her mother to know. Grace drove them to the Harbor Institute. Shirley and Bobby came too, not to make it bigger than it needed to be, but because Rosalie had, without asking directly, seemed to need the physical presence of people around this departure. The Harbor Institute was a building at the edge of a small town, converted from a former estate, with grounds and trees and the particular quality of intentional spaces. Thought had gone into what the environment was supposed to do to people, and the doing was visible. Patricia held her daughter at the entrance. They held each other for a long time. "I'll be at every family visit," Rosalie said. Her voice was steady. She'd decided to be steady. This was an act of love and not a loss, and she was going to feel it as both and be okay. "I know you will," Patricia said. "I'm going to read that book," Rosalie said. "So we can discuss it." "Which one?" "The one I told you about. The chemistry one." "Rosie," Patricia said. She pulled back to look at her daughter's face. "I need you to know something." "Okay." "Whatever happens, I know what you're going to say, that I have to believe in the outcome. But whatever it takes, I'm going to do this." Patricia's face was clear and raw and entirely present. "I'm going to come back. I'm going to come back with that laugh. I'm going to come back and sing in the kitchen, and we're going to be okay. Not the managed version. Actually okay." Rosalie recognized her own words in her mother's mouth. "I know," she said. "I love you," Patricia said. "I love you," Rosalie said. Patricia went inside. What followed was not a time of crisis. This was the part that surprised Rosalie most, in retrospect, that the 90 days were not 90 days of emergency, but 90 days of ordinary. Of going to school and coming home and eating food Grace made and doing homework and playing games with Bobby on Mondays and talking about marine biology with Margot and arguing about systemic issues with Sam. Of going to family visits at the Harbor Institute every single week. Of sitting across from her mother in a visiting room and watching, week by week, her mother come back. Not dramatically. Not in a single transformative moment. But by degrees, the clarity returning to her eyes, the sharpness of her humor reasserting itself, the laugh appearing more frequently until it stopped being covered by a hand and just existed, loud and surprised and entirely itself. Of being in a network of people who showed up. This was the other surprise. Not just the practical showing up, the driving and the presents and the groceries, but the way it changed Rosalie's understanding of what it was possible to have. She'd been operating on the assumption that her unit was 2 people, her and her mother, that the world beyond that unit was uncertain and untrustworthy and to be managed with caution. The assumption was not wrong exactly. The world was uncertain. But the assumption had been missing something. The something it was missing was this, that people chose. That the people who showed up were making active decisions to show up, and those decisions were real and reliable in a way that was different from institutional reliability, because it was chosen, because it was human, because it came from somewhere. Bobby chose to be there on Mondays because of his 4 grandchildren and his understanding of what it meant for a child to be alone in something too large for them. Shirley chose to be there because Roland asked her to and because she had spent 30 years making the choice to show up for things that mattered. Donna chose to be there because she had 3 kids and she knew what a family looked like and what it looked like when a family needed another family around it. And Roland Hicks, 62 years old, the man Rosalie had not yet met, the man who had made the phone call that had started all of this, was making choices that rippled out from him the way choices do when they come from a person who has understood something important about why they are here. She met Roland on the first family visit. Not at the Harbor Institute, outside of it, in the parking lot, where Shirley had parked the car and where Roland had arrived separately and was leaning against his motorcycle in the November air. Rosalie got out of the car and saw him. He was large. That was the first thing. Large in the way of Bobby and Shirley and Donna, not threateningly but substantially, the presence of someone who took up his allotted space without apologizing for it. He looked at her. "Rosalie," he said. "Roland," she said. He looked slightly surprised by the directness of it. Then something in his face shifted, a recognition, the same thing Grace and Bobby had shown. "Grace told me about you," he said. "She told me about you," Rosalie said. "She told me about your sister. And the program." "Yeah." He looked at the facility building behind her. "How's your mom doing?" "Week 4, Rosalie said. "Better than week 3. Her therapist says she's doing the work." Good, Roland said. He said it with the simplicity of someone for whom doing the work was the only metric that mattered. I wanted to ask you something, Rosalie said. Go ahead. Why this? She looked at him. Not in general. I know why the program exists. I know about your sister. But why consistently? Why not a one-time thing? Why not just connect people to services and leave it at that? Why the ongoing, the Shirley on Tuesdays and Bobby on Mondays and the schedule and... Roland thought about it. Really thought about it. Because consistency is the thing, he said. Services exist. Systems exist. They're necessary and they're not enough. What they don't provide is consistency. The same person, same day, same promise kept week after week. That's different from a system. That's what family is supposed to be, and when family can't do it, someone has to. Rosalie was quiet. Your sister's kids, she said. The ones who were separated. Roland's face went through something. My nephew is okay, he said. Eventually. He's 28 now. He's all right. A pause. My niece, she had a harder road. She found her way. But the separating cost her things she's still paying for. He looked at the ground briefly. Back at Rosalie. That's not going to happen to you. That's not happening to any family we can reach. That's the whole point. Rosalie looked at him. Thank you, she said. She said it the way she said things that mattered. Not as courtesy, not as performance, but with the full weight of what she meant. Roland met her eyes. You called 911, he said. Before anything else, before Grace called me, before any of this, you called 911 and you stayed on the phone and you gave them everything they needed. Everything that followed happened because you made that call. Rosalie was quiet. I know, she said finally. You saved your mother, he said. This program, we're just making sure the saving sticks. Christmas came while Patricia was still at the Harbor Institute. Rosalie had known it would. She'd planned for it, the way she planned for everything, with information and practical arrangement. She'd talked to the program about holiday visiting. She knew she'd see her mother on Christmas Day, that the Institute had a family visiting morning on December 25th, that she and Grace and whoever wanted to come would drive out there in the morning. She'd bought a gift for her mother. Saved from the small amount Grace gave her for expenses, she'd been careful, hadn't spent on anything she didn't need, and had accumulated enough. She bought the book she'd been telling her mother about. The chemistry book. She'd written in the margins for her mother, not all the way through, just the first chapters, little notes in her handwriting that her mother would find. She'd also made something. She'd been making it for weeks, working on it after homework, carefully, with the specific focus she brought to things that mattered. A journal. She'd bought a blank one, good paper, and on each page she'd written something, a memory, a specific moment, the kind of particular detail that is not a summary but the real thing. Her mother's laugh, described in careful words. The kitchen on Sunday mornings before the accident. The way her mother looked when she was in the middle of a complicated problem. The focused expression, the pen twirling between her fingers. The time a patient had sent a card to the nursing station, and her mother had read it out loud and tried not to cry and then cried anyway. 43 pages of the real things. On Christmas morning, Grace drove. Shirley and Bobby came because they'd been invited and they'd said yes because they were the kind of people who said yes. They went into the visiting room. Patricia was already there. She looked different from week 1. Rosalie had been tracking the changes week by week, the clarity building, the presence deepening, the gradual return of the person who had been there before the accident, and the medications, and the 14 months of trying and failing and trying. She was not all the way back. Nobody was all the way anything after 90 days. But she was oriented toward back. She was moving in the right direction with her whole self. She hugged Rosalie first. Long, complete. Rosalie gave her the gifts. Patricia opened the book and found the margins and pressed her lips together and breathed through her nose. She opened the journal and began to read. She didn't get through more than the first few pages before the tears came. Not sad tears, Rosalie thought, or not only sad. The kind of tears that come from being seen. From someone holding up a mirror that shows you what you actually are. "Rosie," Patricia said. "I didn't want you to forget," Rosalie said. "Any of it. I didn't want you to forget what we are when we're good." Patricia held the journal. "I didn't forget," she said. "I couldn't access it. But I didn't forget." "I know," Rosalie said. "The journal is for when you need to access it." Shirley, in the corner of the room, was looking very carefully at the window. Bobby appeared to be examining his own hands with deep interest. Grace was not pretending she wasn't crying. She made no apology for it. Roland had come too, this time. He sat in the back of the room and watched without saying anything, and after a while Rosalie looked at him across the room, and he gave her the small acknowledging nod of someone who is witnessing something that confirms what he believed. She nodded back. Patricia came home on the 3rd day of February. She came home to their house. The house had been maintained, the rent covered through the insurance payout from the original accident that a lawyer had finally secured, one of the practical things Grace had connected them with during the 90 days. It had been cleaned. There were groceries in the kitchen. On the table there was a vase with flowers, not elaborate, just flowers, something yellow against the February gray. Rosalie stood in the middle of the living room. She looked at the chair where she'd found her mother, the chair that had been the center of the worst afternoon of her life. Her mother looked at the chair too. They stood there, looking at it together. "We can get rid of it," Patricia said. Rosalie thought about it. "I don't think we should," she said. Patricia looked at her. "I think we should keep it," Rosalie said. "So we know we came through it. So we have something that shows us where we were and how far we've come from it." Patricia looked at the chair for a long moment. "Okay," she said. "Okay. We keep it." She looked around the room. At the house she hadn't been in for 90 days. At the yellow flowers on the table. She walked to the kitchen. She stood in the middle of it. She turned on the radio that sat on the counter, found something on it, an old song, something from years before, something both of them knew. She started to sing. Quietly at first, then less quietly. Her voice, which Rosalie had not heard in 14 months the way it sounded right now, present, herself, coming from the full-body place that singing comes from when it's real. Rosalie stood in the kitchen doorway. She listened. She put her hand over her mouth. Not to cover a laugh. To contain the overwhelming fullness of the moment. The kitchen and the radio and her mother's voice and the February light coming through the window and the sense of a thing that had been lost finding its way back from a very long distance. She was not going to cry in her own kitchen on a Tuesday in February. She cried in her own kitchen on a Tuesday in February. 6 months passed. Patricia worked again. Not nursing, not yet. That was in the plan, but required the physical clearance for the back pain, which was being managed properly now by the right doctor with the right combination of treatment. She worked for a medical administrative company, remote, part-time at first and then full-time, using the clinical knowledge she had in a way that didn't require her to be on her feet. She went to meetings. She had grace. She had a plan, and she followed it, and the plan was not always easy, and there were hard days, and Grace talked her through the hard days. And Rosalie, who was older now, 12 going on something much older, noticed the hard days and didn't fix them because she had learned, slowly, that it wasn't her job to fix them. It was her job to be there. Just to be there. Roland's club came to dinner in August. This was Rosalie's idea. She'd talked to Grace about it, then to her mother, and they'd agreed, and she'd reached out to Roland through Grace. She had his number now, had called it twice with updates because she decided it was right for him to know, and he'd said yes, easily, the way he said yes to things that were obvious. They came on a Sunday. Not all of them, not the full chapter, not 180 motorcycles. Shirley and Bobby and Donna and Roland and 4 others who had been part of the orbiting presence of the past 6 months, who had shown up in the various practical ways that keeping a family stable requires. 9 people at a dinner table that had been extended with folding tables and covered with a tablecloth and set with the mismatched dishes Patricia had. Patricia cooked. Real cooking, the Sunday kind, the kind that required effort and produced something that made the house smell like the house used to smell, like the before time, the before the accident time, the time that was coming back. Rosalie sat at the table and looked at the people around it. Bobby on her left, telling a story that required his hands to be very busy to illustrate. Shirley across from her, listening with the slight expression of someone who had heard this story before and found it worth hearing again. Donna beside Roland, showing Patricia a picture on her phone of something her kids had done, Patricia looking at it with the fully engaged interest of someone who was back in her body and present in the world. Outside, the August evening was doing what August evenings did, the long slow descent toward dark, the light going golden and then amber and then the first blue of evening, the smell of the neighbor's garden coming through the open windows. Rosalie had set the table. She'd done it carefully, the way she did things, with the particular attention she brought to settings and details. She'd put the flowers in the center, simple ones, from the grocery store, something yellow, the same yellow as the day her mother had come home. She looked at the flowers. She looked at the people around the table. She thought about October, about 4:47 on a Wednesday afternoon, about the dispatcher carol and the 9 words she'd said, "My mom isn't waking up, I checked, she's breathing," about the ambulance and the hospital and the waiting room and the beige walls and the first moment she'd allowed herself to fall apart in Grace's arms. She thought about 180 Hell's Angels, which was the full chapter, though only 9 of them were here tonight. She thought about the way one phone call from Grace to Roland had sent ripples outward, the way a decision sends ripples, Shirley calling Bobby, calling Donna, the schedule forming, the presence materializing around her and her mother like something built from the ground up, one person at a time. She thought about consistency. The specific word Roland had used in the parking lot. Consistency is the thing. She picked up her glass. "Can I say something?" she said. The table quieted. 8 adults and 1 12-year-old, and the 12-year-old had spoken, and they all understood by now that when Rosalie and Drummond spoke it was worth listening to. "I want to say thank you," she said. She looked around the table. "I know that sounds simple. I know I've said it before. But I want to say it in this specific way, in this specific room, so that it's real. So it's not just a thing I said." Bobby had stopped gesturing with his hands. He was watching her. "Last October," she said, I was 11 years old, and my mother was in a chair, and I called 911, and I held everything together for about 4 hours until it became clear she was going to be okay. Then I fell apart in a waiting room. She looked at Grace. Someone held me while I did. Grace pressed her lips together. And then she looked at Shirley, Bobby, Donna, Roland. And then people I'd never met decided to show up. On a schedule. Consistently. Not because they had to. Because they chose to. She paused. I've been thinking about why that matters so much. Why showing up on purpose, by choice, is different from showing up because you're supposed to. And I think it's because... She paused. When someone shows up because they're supposed to, you're a responsibility. When someone shows up by choice, you're a reason. The table was very still. You made my mother a reason, she said. And you made me a reason. And that's different from everything I'd experienced for 14 months, which was being a responsibility. Even to my mother, who loved me, I was something she was responsible for and failing at. But you, she looked at them all. You chose us. You drove out in November and December and January and February. You sat in Grace's kitchen and played board games with me and argued about chemistry. You drove me to a hospital 3 times a week so I didn't have to take a bus. She looked at Roland. You made a program out of your own loss so that other people's losses wouldn't compound. So that kids wouldn't be separated. So that families would get the chance to come back together. Roland's jaw worked. I want to be that person, Rosalie said. When I'm old enough. When I know enough. I want to be the person who shows up on purpose. I want to be someone's reason. She lifted her glass. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you for showing me what that looks like. Nobody moved for a moment. Then Bobby, who had 4 grandchildren and brought cookies to meetings and was the most efficient logistics organizer Roland had ever seen, quietly and without apology wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Shirley raised her glass. Everyone raised their glasses. To Rosalie, Shirley said. To Rosalie, everyone said. Rosalie's mother, across the table, held her glass up and looked at her daughter, looked at her with a full, present, entirely herself look that had been coming back degree by degree since February, the look Rosalie had been waiting for, the look that said, I see you. I am here. I came back. To my daughter, Patricia said. Her voice was steady and full. Who saved my life and then spent 6 months making sure it was a life worth saving. The laugh came out when she said it. The sudden, loud, surprised laugh. She covered it with her hand. She always covered it with her hand. Rosalie laughed too. Around the table, everyone laughed. The August evening came through the open windows, and the flowers were yellow in the center of the table, and the house smelled like cooking and laughter and the specific warmth of people who had chosen to be there.